In this video, I'm going to be talking about my brand new YouTube studio lens, the Sony 35mm F1.8. Here's the story. The Sony 35mm F1.8 has a minimum aperture of f1.8, obviously by the name, and a maximum aperture of f22. It has 9 circular aperture blades and also has a linear autofocus motor which is quick and quiet. The lens is also dust and moisture resistant. The minimum focus is 22 centimeters and the filter thread size is 55 millimeters. The lens features an autofocus and manual focus switch and also one customizable button. The lens weighs 280 grams and unfortunately there is no optical steady shot or OSS. And this is the look that you can expect in a YouTube studio much like this. I'm shooting right now at an f1.8 and you can't even really see the background right now. It is smoothed out, it is quite out of focus, and you can't even read the number that's on my metric time unit in the background. In case you're wondering, it's 831. So we can see what it looks like at 1.8. Let's bring some sanity back to the background and change the aperture to an f2.8. This is now what the lens looks like at an f2.8, and I have changed my ISO from 640 to 1250 just to compensate for the change in the aperture. Let's now see what the lens looks like at an f4. The lens is now at an f4 and I've changed the ISO to 2500 and this is what it looks like. As you can tell, the background is a little bit more in focus and really it just really comes down to what your personal preference is on background out of focusness, or bokeh as a lot of people refer to it as. Some people's personal preference is to have the background really out of focus, really blurred out, and other people like to have a little bit more in focus. It really just depends on what your personal preference is. And the great thing to note about this lens is if you really want that blurry out of focus background, this lens is more than capable of it. But if you also do want to keep some of the background in focus, you can just stop it down to something more reasonable like an f4 and you can see more in focus. Let's stop it down again to f5.6. We're now at f5.6 and I've bumped the ISO up to 5000 and this is what it looks like. And as you can see, more is in focus in the background. And now we're at an f8 and as you can see, more is in focus in the background. The ISO has now changed to 10,000 and this is what you could expect with a f8 at 10,000 ISO on the Sony a7S III in a typical YouTube studio setup. So far in this video, I've recorded everything without any filters over the front of the lens. Typically I use a Tiffin Black Pro Mist filter 1/8 strength, so I'm going to put that on now. And now we've got the Tiffin Black Pro Mist filter 1/8 strength on, and I've changed the aperture back to an f2.8 just because I didn't want so much to be in focus in the background. And this is typically what I would record in my YouTube studio setup. I find the 35mm focal length a really good length to be able to do shots like this talking to camera. So if you find yourself in a space where you haven't got a lot of room, 35mm lens on a full frame camera should do the trick. Right now I'm almost able to touch the lens. Actually, I'm touching the lens now. And that's how far away the camera is from me talking to it. If I was on a wider lens, I could probably have the camera a little bit closer to me, but then it starts to put a little bit of distortion on my face. And I find the compression and the look of a 35mm more pleasing than a 24mm or anything even wider than that. Once you get wider, then for me, typically a 35mm, it starts to look a little bit unnatural and not as flattering as a 35mm lens. That's why I've chosen to go with this lens, just because I think it looks just a little bit better than your typical 24mm lens. That was the other option I was thinking of using, but after thinking about it and looking at this lens as well, I figured that the 35mm f1.8 works really well for what I want to achieve in this YouTube studio. Also with this Tiffin Black Pro Mist filter 1/8 strength, it softens out the image just a little bit. It takes away that digital sharpness that you find on a lot of modern mirrorless cameras. And I find this to be a more pleasing look for the types of videos that I want to create. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you like it? Is it something just a little extra that you think isn't needed? Or do you think it's that little difference that makes a big difference in the end? And finally with this lens, one thing I want to highlight is there isn't a lot of focus breathing. As you can see, we've got focus on my hand, and then when I take my hand away and we get focus on my face, you can see that I'm now back in focus, but there isn't any focus breathing. And on a lot of the Sony G Master lenses, from what I can see from reviews online and just sample footage, there's a lot of focus breathing, which kind of looks like the lens is zooming in and out of the image when it's refocusing, which looks really distracting and isn't something that I really like in my videos. So that's why I've gone with this particular lens. And I know when people are looking for prime lenses for Sony cameras, their eyes are a lot of the time drawn to the G Master lenses. And although they might be optically almost perfect from some of the reviews that I've seen, they do have a lot of focus breathing, and that's not a problem if you're a photographer and you're taking lots of photos. But when you're a videographer like myself, or possibly yourself who makes YouTube videos, you don't want to have that focus breathing whenever you're moving in and out from the camera, because then it just becomes a little bit distracting and doesn't look that great. So that's why I've opted to go with this lens. And one of the benefits of this lens as well is that it is significantly cheaper than the G Master lenses. It's still a Sony lens, so you're still getting that great reliable autofocus, and you're getting that native performance between the Sony camera and the Sony lens. There's no adapters or anything like that. So I find this lens to be really good for my setup, and it's also a good option if you're wanting to try to maximize your budget and not spend thousands of dollars on a single lens. As a video producer, I know that there's always something extra that I can be purchasing, whether it's extra memory cards, extra lenses, extra batteries, extra camera bodies, extra lights, audio. There's always something extra that you need to be buying. And if you can save some money on a lens much like the one that I've got here, then it ends up making your money go further and allows you to be able to purchase more gear to be able to create the kinds of videos that you want to create at a more affordable price. So they're my initial thoughts on the Sony 35mm f1.8 lens. Let me know what you think of this look in the comments, and if you like this video, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to this channel for more videos on content creation in the future.